Okay, in the last video, we learned that Marx's theory of history begins with primitive communalism, where people are hunters and gatherers. There's no surplus value produced, right? People kind of live hand to mouth, no private property, no political system, and no class system. Simple way of life that lasted for tens of thousands of years. But this is going to go away, according to Marx, and slavery will be the next economic system to emerge. The forces of production will push the primitive communal economy into better ways of production, land-intensive production with large-scale agricultural areas and domestication of animals. People will be able to harness nature in a way that vastly improves the productivity of each worker. This began approximately 10,000 years ago around the Middle East region of the Fertile Crescent. And what you begin to see alongside this increased productivity is different levels of power. The masters are those individuals that were able to get control over land and labor, to effectively possess land and labor with ownership rights and everything. Whereas the slave did not possess land and labor. They were forced to work under the dominion of the master to survive. Surplus value does exist in this kind of economy. In fact, it's really the first stage we begin to see the expropriation of productivity from the worker. There is an expansion in productivity, so the worker is able to produce each day far more than what they would need to survive. So there is an incentive for the master to take control over the slave so they can get that surplus value. Remember, in the primitive communal environment, there is very little surplus value produced, which means that even if you were to enslave somebody, production levels are so low, it's not even worth your time. You're not going to get much. But here, with the increased land-intensive production and domestication of animals, laborers are able to produce far more than they need to survive. And that extra value is going to be attractive to those in power. Incentive to produce diminishes as surplus value is transferred from slave to master. Hence, control of labor becomes critical to efficiency. One of the challenges of a slave-master relationship is it's quite costly for the master to coerce the slave to actually work hard and to be productive, and to monitor the slaves to ensure compliance with the master's goal. That means that it may not be worth it in all instances. You would really have to have a highly productive worker for a master to want to incur the costs of enslaving somebody else, which is why it doesn't exist everywhere. It only exists in areas where there is high-level productivity. Private property emerges in this stage of history, in this economic system. The land and the labor become owned by the master. Again, in primitive communalism, there is no private property because there's no reason to own anything. Right? You're living hand to mouth. And let's say you did claim land for yourself and you claimed labor for yourself. You started to have slaves. You forced them to work. Remember, they're not able to produce any more than what is necessary to survive. So you'd be forcing someone into a situation where they can only produce enough for themselves. There's little incentive to do that and to undergo the coercion necessary to do that. That's why you don't see slavery through most of human history. You see it emerge later on when we get into higher levels of production. The political system in this environment could be autocratic or democratic, but we know it's going to be used to protect and allocate property rights to land and slaves. How else are you going to get people to surrender their labor for the benefit of someone else, or to surrender their land for the benefit of someone else? Coercion is necessary, and the political system brings that about to the benefit of the master. It's a class system, masters and slaves. The conflict is there. You've got the forces of production trying to push us forward, right? We improved our ability to produce. This is a more productive environment than primitive communalism. But the relations are going to stifle that progression. The slaves begin to resent the masters. They start to see the system as unjust, unfair. They don't work as hard. They resist. This eventually creates the revolution necessary to move the system to a higher order one. And that's going to be feudalism, where the slaves become rent-paying serfs. This is what happened to the Roman Empire and the Grecian empires, where their ability to coerce became so expensive that it effectively bankrupted the leaders. The evolution into feudalism is one that still involves a lot of land-intensive production, but we do begin to see capital and technological developments as well. The forces of production are proceeding. The ability to produce is improving. Output per worker goes up. It's a lord and serf society rather than a master and slave. The lord is the one that provides the safety in the village. The serf is the one that effectively lives under the safety, but pays for it in the form of rent. About 5th to 15th centuries common era. There is surplus value. Excess production is accumulating to the lord in the form of rent. But it's a better situation for the serf than it would be as a slave, because the serf gets to keep all excess productivity above and beyond the rent they have to pay. So the slave had to hand it all over. The serf only hands over a portion of it. This incentivizes greater productivity because you might have two serfs, and if one is more productive than the other, they pay the same rent, but the one that's more productive has a higher standard of living, so they work harder. You also get technological and capital advancements in this system, in part because there are incentives to increase productivity, and technology and capital can do that. This is much less likely under the system of slavery. Slaves don't get to keep their excess productivity, any of it. So why would they go out and come up with new ideas or save up to get capital equipment if they're not going to benefit from it? You still have private property, but not for labor, right? It's land and capital now, and that's managed and controlled by the political system. Almost always autocratic, with a lord, right? The lord of the land, landlord, or the king. And the class system that results creates a conflict between the relations and the forces of production. In essence, you have a lot of these serfs that become more powerful as merchants and start to accumulate influence that threaten the dominance of the king, right? I mean, remember, within the kingdom, some people are going to be more productive than others. And that allows for this almost upward mobility in wealth and power that would never exist under slavery. And the workers, the serfs, I should say, they are not owned by the king. So they have a distinct freedom that would not have existed in slavery. So there is this movement that eventually overthrows the king. The conflict ensues because the merchant class says, hey, why are we working hard? We're the ones that keep this kingdom going, and you've got this king that's telling everybody what to do, and we don't need him. And so that ushers in a new era, a new capitalist era. But feudalism is best exemplified by medieval Europe and France with the famous, kings and queens and all of that stuff. But today, it's moved into a capitalist system. This is where capital and technology are dominant in production. The forces are strong. You get your industrial revolution and your technological revolution. Output per worker skyrockets, and standard of living can go up quite dramatically. It is about the 15th century to the present. There's surplus value. Excess production from the worker goes to the capitalist in the form of profit. The worker does get more compared to feudalism, but their relative position may diminish. There is private property, and just as in feudalism, it's applied to land, capital, but now we add technology. Remember, in a capitalist system, technology tends to really get a foothold because there is not only strong incentives to produce more because you can keep more if you're more productive, but with the assignment of property rights to technology, if you come up with an idea, you're the only one that can use it. Things like patents, trademarks, copyrights, that type of stuff is assigning property ownership to ideas. The political system is typically democratic, but the capitalists accrue a disproportionate amount of political power in the system. The capitalists, with their wealth and income, are able to use the system, the political system, and other elements of the superstructure to their benefit. Marx talks a lot about how democracy is often used as a way to appease the masses. Well, you get a vote, when in reality, he would say that they don't truly get a vote because it's not just about votes, it's about money, it's about influence, and so forth. It's a class system, the capitalist and the worker. The conflict is there. The relations of production are going to thwart the forces of production. The capitalist class will grow under a profit motive, but wealth and income will become disproportionately distributed. The inequality will create the seeds of a revolution. The people will see the injustice and they will overthrow the capitalist via a uprising. Now, we're not there yet. Marxists would say that it's coming, whether it's a year from now or 200 years from now. The theory of history, according to Marx, is it will come. Notice the theory of history as a whole. We start out in this primitive communal environment, which doesn't actually have the kind of contradictions, conflict that subsequent economic systems do. So that period was one of no surplus value, no private property, no government, right? No social hierarchy. It almost sounds like, from Marx's writings, a utopia. But the forces of production are moving us forward and pushing us into that next phase of economic evolution called slavery. The increased productivity allows for more production beyond what an individual can consume in themselves. So consequently, people in power emerge to try to get that excess production. And that's where the problem begins, according to Marx. And that problem continues between the master and the slave in slavery, between the lord and the serf under feudalism, and then between the capitalist and the worker under capitalism. Moving ahead, we're going to see that the conflict doesn't resolve itself until we get to communism, which is where we're, in essence, all the way back to where we started, primitive communalism. There's no social hierarchy, there's no government, there's no private property. All those conflicts are gone. But according to Marx, we have to go through this long period of unrest, malaise, evil, competition, a whole bunch of immiserating events that only subtract from the human experience. But it's an unfortunate necessity so we can evolve to that ultimate higher order of communism. Now, Marx is operating in this period where capitalism is the dominant economic system. So most of his teachings come from the capitalist perspective. And that's where we're going to focus, understanding why he believes capitalism will fail, why he believes capitalism is unjust, and how it will change. We'll pick up there in the next video. Thanks.